I'm Raikes and I'm the VCS advocate on Safer Bristol Executive in Bristol, and I'm reporting today on the latest Safer Bristol Executive Board meeting, which was Thursday the 16th of August, to let you know the highlights of the meeting. So the agenda focused this time on the Bristol Safeguarding Adults Board annual report. It's looked at the new commissioning strategy for substance abuse, recovery-orientated substance misuse treatment systems, basically drugs and alcohol commissioning, which is worth several million, I think about £12 million to the city. It looked at, we didn't get to discuss the new chair and vice chair of the executive, although it looks like Marilyn Harrison has agreed to stand again as chair. There will be a discussion at the next meeting to confirm that appointment and also to decide on the vice chair. We looked at the crime reduction and substance misuse services priorities. We also looked at the Bristol City Council's counter-trafficking protocol and the Bristol reducing reoffending plan from probation was also summarised. We had an update on the Police and Crime Commissioner and any other businesses. I guess what I'll do, I'll just give the key points from those agenda items, and then obviously people can look up for more information on the Bristol City Council website. I think you'll find all the minutes are there, and you can contact Vosca or myself for more information. Guess if we look at first the Safeguarding Adults Board annual report, that was really interesting because this board's taken a little while to get off the ground, and it now is becoming more than just a talking shop and is having quite an impact on particularly the key statutory agencies that have a responsibility to safeguard adults. And I think after the Winterbourne View report, that's really taken off in terms of how much it's being prioritised by the city. It's chaired by Alison Comley, which is really good. And they've done things like set up a large-scale investigations protocol so that should there be anything like Winterbourne View in the future, and I believe there has actually been something of a similar nature. It's confidential, the hospital that was involved, but there already has been, this protocol's been recently used to great effect. It basically means that a lead commissioner is appointed, there'll be specialist nurses appointed to help with the investigation and to go in, and they will sort of set the actions, look at what criminal action needs to be taken. They'll work with the CQC, for example. They've got specialist safeguarding nurses. So it's good, it's a really good protocol to know that we've now got in Bristol area to help bring people together at the earliest opportunity when a report comes in. And they feel, certainly the reports coming in, that they're far more likely now to investigate something far sooner, rather than leaving it till people have really suffered for too long, as we've seen in other scenarios. So that's worth a look at if you get time. And it talks about all sorts of things. They're looking at setting up a safe haven scheme, which I thought was fascinating. And hopefully maybe Vosca can take on board looking at that in more detail. And that would be where anybody who's vulnerable or someone on their behalf could go, anyone who's afraid and doesn't know what to do. And this is particularly looking at, for example, vulnerable older people who are one of the groups that are most targeted by financial and emotional abuse. But they could go there and there'd be a bit of a one-stop shop. And that's still an idea at the moment, but it sounds like a good idea. So yeah, that's that report. So as I said, strongly recommend you have a look at that. Then they did, Sue Bancroft gave us a summary of the Safer Bristol Commissioning and Recovery Orientated Substance Misuse Treatment System. It's a very long title, but it's basically the drugs and alcohol commissioning strategy that's just out. It seems to be pretty well drafted in my opinion, but obviously you need to have a look at that if this is an area that's of interest to you, or that if you're running a service that will be affected by this. I would very strongly recommend that you do look at it and feedback on it. I'm not going to go into details now because it's pretty lengthy, and that's because it is worth a lot. There's a lot of services involved in that. It's a lot of money being invested, so I would say take your time to look at that if you get time. We had The Bristol Reducing Reoffending Plan, which is basically probation's plan, if you like, annual plan for the 2012-2013, and I guess in terms of what should you be really looking at, is have a look at their new priorities for the year, which I think are quite dynamic really. They're looking at really developing and using restorative justice post-sentence more. That links in with some of the work that VOSCA's looking to spend a bit of time on as well. They are keen to really carry on making sure impact's very effective, and that's the integrated offender approach that they're using for more and more offenders now. They've got it well developed for the serious prolific offenders, but they're extending it to shoplifters and people who are substance abusers, and trying to get that integrated offender management approach used wherever they can, because it's been proven to be pretty effective actually for Bristol. The other thing they're really keen to continue to promote and use is Eden House, which it was really talked about at this executive just how successful that's proving. That's the only female centre in Bristol that works with women who are at risk of, or who have actually entered the criminal justice system, and I believe it's having very good effects. It follows the recommendations of the Corsten report, so that's a good priority. They want to ensure that accommodation for offenders is suitable and readily available. They're looking at developing a peer mentoring service and service user forum for offenders to inform new activities and approaches. And there's going to be a focus on improving their use of volunteers. Bit of a big society link there, but anyway, I think everyone's having to do that at the moment with limited funding. So those are the priorities, and anyone who wants to know more or question that, Marilyn Harrison is the lead from probation. We looked at the White Ribbon City campaign in Any Other Business, and I think that's worth a mention. It's particularly looking at the White Ribbon campaign is around trying to get Bristol White Ribbon City status, which is all about zero tolerance against violence and abuse against women and girls. It looks like a really positive campaign for Bristol to be getting involved in, and it'd be great if we can obviously get that status. I think this needs to be linked in a bit more with some of the other work that's going on around abuse and violence against women and girls, so I'll be talking to VOSCA about how that can be linked in with other things that are going on. But if you want to know more, Peter Anderson and Ruth Dawes are leading on that piece of work. I think the other thing that there was some feedback on was just there was a scrutiny inquiry day on drug policy impacts on the 4th of April. That's quite a long time ago, but the report's being completed, and that was a fascinating day where they were really looking at the decriminalisation of drugs, and it's a very interesting debate, and it's worth a read if you get time to look at what's come out of that. Leading experts, national and international, attended to give evidence, and anyone who had any links whatsoever or interest in tackling drugs and substance abuse from Bristol, there was a high level of attendance from, and that was really examining what could that mean, because there are other countries and cities that have decriminalised drugs, and they found it actually to have quite positive effects. So it's interesting to see what the evidence presented there is, because it's now readily available, and they're looking to feed in. It wasn't ever meant to put recommendations forward, it's meant to have a very in-depth discussion and debate, but it has really, if you like, led to some recommendations and ways forward. I did also raise that the hate crime commissioning hadn't been brought to the Safer Bristol table like nearly every other commissioning strategy I know, so I raised that as a concern. Because we cannot get it to the table now before the next executive, it's going to be circulated to all members, and I'm doing what I can obviously with my hate crime hat to make sure that that's consulted on as much as possible. So anyone who watches me today, if you're before the closing date, I think it's sometime towards the end of September, early October, make sure you feed into that if you can. The Agenda Item 8 looked at the counter-trafficking protocol that Bristol City Council have just launched, and that's specifically designed to act as a guide for Bristol City Council staff who may come across people who they suspect have been trafficked to Bristol or at risk of being trafficked out of Bristol. It's worth a look at, actually, and the reason they brought it to the table was they want other key agencies to think about how they apply a similar protocol for their own agency. I pointed out that counter-trafficking really could be improved with the support of the VCS and the voluntary sector. So I'm going to be talking to Voska about how they can promote this a bit more. It's got all sorts of tips around how to identify trafficked people, where are they most likely perhaps to be found, which communities, which venues, what do you look out for, and then to know where to refer such cases. So this is worth a look at. The other thing is there was an update, an agenda item update on the Police and Crime Commissioner. I'm not going to go into detail on that because there's lots of information in the minutes and also in other forums that are happening at the moment. I think the key point I do remember though was that it's been made very clear by central government that the funds that are currently with community safety partnerships, and in this case Safer Bristol, are not going over to the Police and Crime Commissioner, they're being stopped. And then the Police and Crime Commissioner will get a budget that will be completely new and standalone. And that was of quite grave concern around the table, actually, because I think there's been the general thought was that the funding goes across. It doesn't go across, it's completely ceased, and no one has any idea what sort of funds are to be allocated to the PCC. But what is known is it will be a completely new pot that belongs completely to the PCC to decide where it goes. And that's a kind of different way of looking at it, so that was important. Just to draw to your attention that there is due to be a question time for the Police and Crime Commissioner candidates on Thursday the 18th of October between 7 and 9 p.m. at the Council House. Do get along to that if you would like to question our potential candidates. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.